So we are going to spin the wheel to see what we're going to cover today. And now you might have noticed if you looked at the other episodes that the wheel has kind of pared down. We decided that maybe some topics are not beefy enough to discuss, so we pared it down to a certain extent. So we have 6 to go, and I think we're going to do a few today. So, Zero, are you ready to spin that wheel?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it! I didn't come up with any other music, so this is going to be quite silent. Here we go. Stadia. Yeah. Stadia had a rocky year this year. Right off the gate, in the beginning of 2022, there were rumors that the Stadia service was shutting down, or that they were canceling the service altogether. Social media accounts and PR for Google and Stadia vehemently denied it. They said that no, we are still developing games, even though they shut down a bunch of studios, and that they are continuing the service as is for the time being. And then in August, I believe, they announced that they, in a blog post by Phil Harrison, that they are sunsetting the service as of January of next year. Zero, you want to comment on the whole timeline when it comes to Stadia?
It was actually just completely wild because I believe we started hearing rumors that the service was probably going to be on its way out as early as February this year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, definitely. And this is not something that was shocking or something that people thought was unbelievable at the time. A lot of people were basically wondering how it was still running. And on top of that as well, a lot of people were also wondering when Google was going to kill this, because Google has a track record of doing a whole bunch of different types of tech, and then when it gets a little rough, just shit canning it entirely. And a lot of people were expecting pretty quickly for Stadia to hit the bucket at some point. I think a lot of people were surprised, including me, that it lasted as long as it did. Because there was a period of time where I had to be reminded that Stadia still existed.
It was just sort of a weird thing, just kind of to see it for most of the year just kind of existing. And then it wasn't until towards closer to the end of the year, they finally went up and conceded and basically said, yeah, so, pulling the plug on the service. Just, yeah, it's got its issues, but what can you do? And that was just kind of it. And
yeah.
Honestly, it just kind of shocked me because I was just like, wow, I didn't realize that they have finally decided to pull the plug on this.
Right, and what surprised me a lot about it, about Stadia being shut down, was not that it was being shut down. I think we all knew it was bound to happen, but that the people who were running Stadia and the people that were developing Stadia and everything were shocked by the announcement. And not just because, it's not one of those mean things like you should have known that you had a turd of a product. It was more or less they were given no warning when the announcement was made. They were stunned. In fact, there were some studios and there were still contracts being made to get the games exclusive to Stadia before when that announcement was made. So it was literally, from what the reports were making it sound like, it was literally someone from the top said, it's time to pull the plug, and then they just did it. It wasn't a gradual thing where most companies would announce it internally, give a timeline, and then prepare everybody to then eventually announce it in public, so then everyone's on the same page and prepared to do what needs to be done. It was literally, yeah, we're shutting this down according to X person says we're shutting it down, and everyone learned at the same time, which honestly is a horrible way of doing things, because then you have these employees who are now out there, especially the PR employees and the people who run these social media accounts, who are bombarded with questions about the service where they do not have answers. So it was kind of nuts watching that happen.
I think really just it was really a shame to just see the developers just being completely in the dark about everything, and then the Google reps kind of misdirecting some of these developers, going, "Oh yeah, it's all good, don't worry about it," just Stadia's still fine, and then just to have the rug pulled out from under them and going, "Oh yeah, so Stadia's dead, so there you go, guys."
Yeah, it was basically, if you want to see like a cold, calculated move done either incompetently or without care. Like, look at what happened with Stadia here, because it really looked like the PR team had no idea what to do. Like, it wasn't like for a day or two that they weren't answering any questions because they needed the information to get out there. It was rough to watch at times. But what led to Stadia essentially going under and having these issues? Stadia started in 2018, 2017, November 2019. Oh, wow. That's a lot later than I thought. So it came out officially in November 2019. And what I remember distinctly when it was released was basically a meme that was on Twitter. And it was basically a 10-second video of somebody playing Destiny 2 through Stadia on their computer. And all it was a guy pressing the space button, and then 2 seconds their Guardian jumps. And that's all you needed. That is all you needed to kill a service. Because it was the one thing that people were very unsure about when it came to a service that generally is just streaming. And that is, how's the lag and latency. And that showed a lot of people it wasn't great.
And in addition to that point, it was a really big contrast to what Google had shown off at the trade show floors, because at the trade show floors, they were just like, look, there's barely any latency. Right. But of course, everyone had the bigger question of, okay, you guys are hosting this at a trade show in a convention hall in California, right next to your data centers in California. What's to say that this isn't basically rigged? Mm-hmm. And of course, Google's marketing team was just like, no, it's not rigged. It's not rigged. We swear. It's all good. It's all good. And of course, everyone was just kind of like, we really doubt this, because your main servers are in Silicon Valley in California, and we're in a convention hall in California. So there's not going to be much latency because the servers are pretty much proverbial next door. So yeah, just this just seems way too good to be true. And right. Of course, just Google kept dismissing it, going, no, it's going to be cool. We're going to have nodes all over the U.S. and in countries where we're going to debut Stadia. So it's going to be 100% good. So the experience you have at this convention hall, you're going to have at home. And then, of course, when that meme came out showing that one guy going, yeah, so remember what Stadia said? The experience is going to be exactly like what they showed off on the trade show floor. We're calling bullshit.
You're absolutely right. They tried to pawn it off as something that the experience they got in the trade show is going to be everywhere, and it wasn't true. The other issue is also the business aspect of Stadia, where essentially you don't have a license to play the game. You have a license to play the game, but since it's all streaming, there's no physical release, so you can't have a disc and play it. But they were the same price as if you were to buy a game on, let's say, on Xbox or on PlayStation. And with it being the same price as well, a lot of people were looking at that and go, well, wait a minute. If it's the same exact price, why am I? Why would I spend $60 on something that I don't have a hard copy for? That seems really strange. So the business aspect of it was flawed as well with them. They did end up having a subscription service called, I think it was called Stadia Pro, that would allow you to play those games with a subscription for like $15. But even then, a lot of people weren't exactly thrilled with the business aspects of Stadia.
Yeah, and another sign, in my opinion, that showed that they were struggling to get adoption numbers up for Stadia was, I want to say it was either last year or 2020, where you had providers like Verizon Fios that if you signed up for a certain level of the Fios service, they would give you a free Stadia pack, which was the controller and a Chromecast 4K just for free. And then in that kit, you also got like, I think, a 3-month trial of Stadia Premium to boot. And when that started to happen, I was just like, ooh, that doesn't look like a good sign. It looks like basically Google's been sitting on these starter kits going, okay, what the fuck are we going to do with all this inventory? We got to move it. Okay, well, let's partner with an ISP and then just give them away with the ISP to say, hey, look, you can use your new high-speed internet service with Google Stadia, and you get to try the premium service. Isn't that a great thing? And even with that, just some people who got the kits were just like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I've tried the Stadia trial and it's awful. I don't want any part of this.
Yeah,
So some people had these kits just literally just end up sitting in their house doing nothing.
yeah. And another thing to point out too, a way that you could make the service work is exclusive titles. Now, when it came out, I think the biggest exclusive title they had was Orcs Must Die 3. Now, I like Orcs Must Die. It's a fun game, but it's not going to push me to a platform. That was also an interesting wrinkle as well. And this also goes into the business of them trying to find talent. Because anecdotal reports were going out from a bunch of journalists who, when talking to people who were on the Stadia team, is that Google really did not play ball with developers. So developers were very shaky on Stadia, and they essentially thought that because they're Google, people will want to work with them. So they didn't work out deals. They didn't give them extra money. They pretty much lowballed anybody who had a passing interest in Stadia to a certain extent, thinking, well, we're Google, you're going to want to work with us. So if you want to be on Stadia and you want to be part of the future, I mean, you're going to have to pay the price. Wasn't one report saying that Kojima wanted to actually do a Stadia game, and
Yeah.
and they lowballed him essentially?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny with the whole mention that Google basically he tried to swagger in like everyone would just die to have an opportunity to work with them because on one of the episodes of the Jeff Gerstmann show, he actually talked about some of his anonymous developer sources
Right.
who talked to him, and he was just like, yeah, just Google, apparently from some of my anonymous developer friends who I cannot disclose who they are due to NDAs and stuff. He was just like, yeah, just some of these people were at the Stadia meetings, and Google's basically well, everyone's going to be on Stadia. Don't you want to be a part of the next biggest thing? Because if you don't, then and you're going to be left behind, and just kind of swaggering their way through. And of course, all these game developers are like, okay, well, what incentives do you have for us to join you? And Google would just kind of go, what incentives? You don't need incentives. We're fucking Google. You want to work with us. You'll beg to work with us. So, and some developers were just like, you know, as neat as that is, you're not really giving us any compelling reasons to work with you. So some developers just laughed at them so hard, basically going, "You guys have no clue on what the hell you're doing."
And it really showed as the 3 years. Good lord, the 3 years passed by, and you'd think during the pandemic that maybe Stadia would have a resurgence when consoles were having a huge resurgence around that time, but no, that didn't happen, and it was basically because of bad word of mouth, a unappealing system that they were having, unappealing business practices, and just an overall sense of directionlessness in the form of Google with Stadia. So it really was not a shock that this service was going down. In fact, I think a lot of people were just counting the days to when it was going to happen. And when the rumors started really churning in like January, February, that it's bound to happen, I think we were just waiting for the timer to go off on that. I will say the one good thing about it being canceled is that Google is refunding everybody who bought kits and games throughout the time that they were playing. So I think the only thing that they are not refunding the subscription service. If I'm correct on that, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
If you subscribe to Stadia Premium, then you won't get any of the money back because that has obviously gone into this to maintain the service. But all game purchases will be refunded, and any developers that have chosen to or have been able to are providing people with ways to export their saves to take them onto other platforms or other services and stuff like that. I think Destiny has something in the works right now.
Well, Destiny's always
On
had the what do you call it, the cross progression thing. So I, I
Yeah,
I don't think I think the one that got some reporting and some traction was Red Dead Redemption 2, because there was that person who was playing Stadia and had 700 hours on Red Dead Online, and suddenly his stuff is going to go kaput when that time comes. And I haven't heard much else after that, to be absolutely honest.
yeah. I think some of the Ubisoft games, like one of the Assassin's Creeds, um, is getting a method to migrate your save off of Stadia,
Okay.
and then you can import it to like a PC version or something. But yeah, just I think Destiny with the Stadia version did not officially have the ability to port your save around. So unfortunately, I imagine Bungie has had been scrambling to get that done for Stadia users, just to make sure that Stadia users can just export their save data and just go to whichever platform they prefer.
Yeah, and again, developers did not know about this until the announcement happened. So they were scrambling too on this. I guess the only thing Stadia and Google did right is refund their purchases when they announced that they're getting rid of the system or the service, because a lot of us, and I will freely admit this, a lot of us thought when they would shut this down that people were just screwed. Like, I did not think Google was going to turn around and say, okay, we'll refund everything. I thought they were going to say, well, you paid for the license. I mean, yeah, you have no access to it, but it's a service, so bye. And that was it. I think it's good on them to actually refund those purchases. But then again, they are Google. They are worth billions at this point. So I think it wouldn't hurt them that much, especially with how little people actually bought stuff on their service. So maybe there's that too.
Honestly, I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did, just because honestly, I think when you had ISPs giving away Stadia starter kits, I was expecting just the service was just gonna implode on itself much sooner, because it just seemed like Google was just desperate to try to give the service a shot in the arm, and the best thought that they had was, okay, well, let's tell our partner ISPs to give these away for people who sign up for new internet service. That way, they can get them into the ecosystem, and boom, guaranteed money. And then, well, when that gamut didn't pay off as well as they thought, I figured, okay, it's just going to be a matter of months before the service pops. And here we are a few years later, and now we're going to see the end of the service this coming January. So, yeah, it's just a real genuine surprise for me that the service lasted as long as it did.
3 years? I mean, I guess I'm not entirely surprised it lasted as long as it did, because Google was putting a lot of, looked like a lot of money into this service, and also advertising it in certain aspects. The advertising went down around the time last year. They stopped advertising as much. And by the way, those ads were terrible. There was
Oh
nothing.
yeah.
There was nothing appealing about those ads. Like, they put a good amount of money trying to market this, and then if you compare that to Luna, which is Amazon's streaming service, where they did nothing, and I mean nothing, to market that, it doesn't surprise me that they did it as long as they did. In fact, I thought they were going to stick it out a little bit longer. I was expecting this to be a next year thing, like they would announce next year at a certain time that they were going to do this. But I guess the costs were getting so out of control, or were just not worth it, to a point where they just decided to cut bait right then and there, and that would have been the end of it. Do you think that a streaming platform like that can succeed in the future, or is this something that is just not tenable in this type of environment?
I think Stadia was just too early um, for what it was. Mostly because just I can't remember the exact source, but I believe it was reported by GameIndustry.biz. This year, I want to say almost 75% of games were purchased as digital copies. So the amount of people buying physical copies actually has gone down this year for once. So I mean, just I think there is a possibility that maybe we might see digital sales being sort of the norm, but I think streaming technology stuff, both like Stadia and Amazon's competing Luna service, I think those particular services have another problem to get past, and that problem being just not all internet services are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my case, I'm lucky that my neighborhood is actually wired for AT&T fiber, and I'm able to get gigabit speeds. But if you cross a certain threshold in my neighborhood, you get into places where you are not eligible for AT&T fiber, and the best you can hope for is either one, Comcast has improved their cable lines to offer gigabit cable, but if they haven't, then you're just going to be stuck with whatever speeds that they can provide that service area, or you can get AT&T DSL.
Ugh.
And yeah, just if you're stuck in a situation like that, yeah, there's no way that something like Stadia or Luna is just going to be even possible to play. And then you have places that are completely out in the sticks and the boonies where they may not even have copper or fiber optic runs to the neighborhood. And maybe the only service that they can even hope to get is something like Elon Musk's Starlink service. Starlink, while great for providing internet in just kind of backwater areas wherever, it's got a lot of latency. So yeah, you've got situations like that where just even if you claim that your servers are everywhere, if the person doesn't have the ability to have high speed, low latency internet, it's not even going to matter.
I think another thing to point out here is that even though digital games are outselling. Is that what you said? It's outselling physical games at this point right now. Like more
I
people are
think
buying.
so.
Let's say it's 50-50. Okay, I think the thing with that is that even though that you don't have a hard copy, you do have a copy somewhere of that game. So if you, I don't know, let's say you bought Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, okay, and you want to play it for some ungodly reason. If you have the disc copy, technically you can play it. Or if you download it off Steam and you have all the files, you can still play it. You definitely still can do it. Whereas with Stadia, you're still paying that $60, but it can be pulled off at any time. It can be taken off completely, which is a really unappealing prospect to have for somebody. And I know a lot of people are not happy with things going digital, but if you still have the files, you still have a running game. So people are a little more comfortable with that than having a service where at any point that can be taken off and you're screwed because you have no files, you have no copy whatsoever. The other thing that I will say when it comes to Stadia or something like Stadia working in the future is I don't think a wholly streaming service is going to work. I think it has to be a feature. And I'm pointing that out because xCloud is something on Microsoft that you can use with Game Pass. And I don't hear a lot of people complaining about xCloud, but it's a feature on a bigger service. So I think that is probably how streaming services is going to work right now when it comes to gaming, until the latency gets so good that it's not a problem. It would have to be a service on something and not the main feature. So, like PlayStation, Xbox, God forbid if Nintendo does it with their Nintendo Online games, so they have that as well. Like, I think they're doing it correctly right now because it's just part of an extra feature on an overall service instead of being the entire service. I think and you're right on this, I think we're about 10, 15 years away for a viable streaming service to be fine with gamers at this point. And let's also be fair, too. You have to get gamers conditioned to be okay with it. And the best way to do that is what I think Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo is doing right now, is making it a part of a service, and then when the time comes, they can rip the Band-Aid and they can go, well, the service is fine, so I guess it's okay, blah, 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 whatever. All right. Anything more to add?
And I was going to say, with regards to boxed games versus digital, I found the information. So gamesindustry.biz basically did sort of an infographic post on the major statistics of the year. And when it came to the discussion of boxed games versus digital games, in the PC space, there was only 2% physical sales and 98% of the sales were digital. Oh. And that makes sense because you've got Epic, you've got Steam, you've got GOG's Galaxy service now. I mean, you've got all that, which pretty much do most of the video game selling on PC nowadays. But what was fascinating was the console market breakdown. They quote the numbers from a report from Newzoo that was published back in November 2022. The console breakdown is 28% of purchases this year were for boxed hard copy games, and 72% of purchases for the console games were actually via digital stores.
Okay, that's interesting. So, but yeah, like people are getting more comfortable getting digital, and I think one of the main reasons too is you get the game right away. You don't have to go to a GameStop when the game releases and then come back home with the game. You can just play right away when that happens. So, makes sense to me.
It'll be really interesting to see how the streaming game landscape comes along because, again, I think Stadia was an interesting idea, but it was just way too expensive. Sales were very, very few and far between, if anything.
Yeah.
And they didn't really have like a killer app that would get people immediately to join the service and suffer through it and go, okay, this isn't great, but hey, this game's interesting. It plays okay. Sure, why the hell not? But yeah, just and I think Amazon's Luna service is also in trouble too. So don't be surprised if we see an announcement that they'll be discontinuing that sometime.
Yeah, I would agree with you right there. I think the killer app that Stadia was trying to make was Baldur's Gate 3, which wouldn't have been a smart idea for a number of reasons, but Baldur's Gate 3 has been in development since 2018, I think. It's been a while it's been in development. So I don't I remember in its advertising and in that big press junket they had. Like that was their big game. So yeah, I don't like but yeah, that was also a poor. I think it was a poor choice. Not that I think that Baldur's Gate is a bad game, not at all. But for something so niche to be that killer app wasn't really the smartest of moves. Thank you for listening to this podcast segment. The Capital Games podcast is done every week, and we post it on all your favorite podcast apps, as well as segments on YouTube. If you want to listen to another segment, you can listen to a new one right there on the screen. We also do a movie podcast called the Capital Games Movie Club. If you'd like, you can go ahead and click on that and see all the movies that we have reviewed from that point. Thank you for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon.